It's not an easy thing to follow the most successful game in a studio's history. Mass Effect 3 was the long-awaited finale to a trilogy that already had two genre-defining and massively successful entries. The second entry in the series was, and still is, the highest-rated game that BioWare has ever put out. Despite the years of anticipation and world-building that led to the events of this game, its release would be bombarded with controversy due to the corporate greed that plagued its particular era in gaming. Day 1 DLC of essential content, missing end slides on release, and years of expectation resulted in review bombing and boycotts of this game. To this day, the user score on Metacritic is the lowest in the original trilogy by far, due to many factors we will discuss later in the video. But despite its initial reception, I as a player cannot help but admit that this game has always been my favorite in the trilogy. It is payoff after payoff. Each mission feels galaxy-defining. Almost every aspect of the game feels the best in the series to me. But is that an opinion biased by time and memory, or does the game remain as satisfying to play for me, or perhaps as insulting to play for others, as it was on day 1? This is the third part of a series of retrospectives that I've made about the Mass Effect series, so if you're interested in hearing my modern thoughts on the first two titles as well, feel free to watch those videos before this one to get a feel for my perspective going into this game again. Just like in those videos, this one will be referring to the Legendary Edition version, which makes some very critical tweaks to how the game works today versus release. If you're watching this video to see if this game is right for you, I want to put a sweeping disclaimer on the top here for you. I cannot imagine that this game would be even remotely as great to those who have not already played Mass Effect 1 and 2. This game should be treated, in my opinion, as an end to an ongoing story, not as the first taste. I am a die-hard proponent to treating the trilogy as one big game. With that being said, this video will be very spoiler-heavy, but as always, the worst spoilers will be reserved for the narrative section of the video. A difference in this retrospective versus the prior two is that narrative will not refer to a subsection of the video, but instead to its second act. There is a lot to talk about in this one. For historical context, I feel it's important to make clear just how much hate this game received. Mass Effect 2 actually received similar criticisms to a degree on its release because it also had begun the practice of predatory paid bonus content thanks to the meddling of EA. But the reason why it must be mentioned when we talk about Mass Effect 3 today is because the reception was so powerful that it would literally shape the version of the game that we have now over a decade later. The first and arguably less severe sin that this game committed that put it on the gamer poo-poo list at the time was having one of the most important companions on the squad locked as a Day 1 DLC. I am of course referring to the Prothean companion Javik. Nowadays, if you play the Legendary Edition with all the DLC included, you might find it shocking to find out that he was not automatically included with every copy of the game on release, given how pivotal he is to the greater themes of Mass Effect. Additionally, his treatment as DLC meant that arguably the importance of his character within the game world had to be downplayed given that many players would never get to see him. So, he couldn't be as plot essential as would seem appropriate for the scale of importance a living Prothean would have. This feels like a waste given how much the Protheans have been talked about throughout the series and was obviously a business tactic to squeeze out a few bucks from invested gamers at the time. The issue is summarized twofold. By having Day 1 DLC rather than post-release DLC, that inherently means that development time was spent on an aspect of the game that they knew would be charged extra to experience. This is a corporate slap in the face to the dev team, who no doubt wanted him to be more important to the greater story, and to the players, who wanted to receive a full game experience Day 1 for the cost of the game they're buying, not the cost plus $5. Javik is still one of the more important companions on the squad today without the extra cost, but I can't help but feel like his role had suffered somewhat due to his necessity being hampered by a predatory cost of entry. That's poo-poo 1, but there was an even bigger, more important, and more terrible sin that the game committed that has since been corrected after the fact. That is the famous color-swatched ending. As I stated in the intro, I will not talk too much about the game's endings until later in the video to avoid major spoilers. But for the sake of documentation, just know that on release, The end slide aftermath credits that you would now see upon finishing the game and making your final choice did not exist. It had to be released after the fact to expand upon the final choice due to the very loud backlash of the original presentation. Just how loud of a backlash? A famous example from the time was that fans sent the BioWare office 400 cupcakes with different colored frosting that all tasted the same as a form of protest, playing on the prevailing critique at the time that the endings were all the same, but with a different color. I will talk a lot about the endings and their meanings in this video, but just know that now it's very arguable that the reception to the endings is subjective rather than unanimously angering due to the patch that expanded on the results of your choices. I feel it's important to remember these criticisms and failings now, even if they no longer seem relevant to the product that includes the sum of all their resulting changes, because they are an aspect that did affect the game as we see it today. They also affected gaming and standards of best practices with future releases, with it now largely being accepted that gaming companies cannot get away with overtly evil practices like day one plot essential DLC. As we look at BioWare's most recent release in the form of Dragon Age: The Veilguard, we can see that they took a lot of lessons from the backlash, some I would argue which are not correct, in releasing in their eyes a final product with no planned DLC. I will talk about how much I love the DLC in this game, but as a consumer, I can appreciate the shift in philosophy and business ethics away from gating essential or meaningful content behind paywalls. With this history lesson out of the way, let's start exploring the game as it is today. In Mass Effect 2, there was a revolutionary formula that BioWare had crafted to serve the focus of that game, its squad of characters. The final mission-based structure gave every companion equal weight, and is remembered fondly because it allowed the series to tighten up some of its more sluggish aspects. But Mass Effect 3 takes a new approach, a much looser one, that somewhat combines 1 and 2. Where 1 was world-based and 2 was squad-based, 3 is conflict-based. It still follows a tight linear, about hour-long mission structure like from 2, but the missions themselves are based on solving galactic conflicts rather than individual squad mates. In other words, where the purpose of the structure of 2 was to build a team, the purpose of 3 is to unite a galaxy. Every action and mission builds up a galactic readiness meter to represent numerically how unified the galaxy is towards stopping the Reaper threat that we have been dreading for 3 games now. Here's a tangent note about Legendary Edition. I can never get to the galactic power threshold I need to get my preferred ending, with my most recent playthrough having done all of the quest and DLC, still leaving me 1100 points short. I know I'm supposed to spend time scanning the galaxy, but I always forget and put it off to later, when the Reapers have already taken up the entire map, so it becomes too much of a pain. So I always end up having to mod my save file, which to me is crazy. In the past, I had no issue getting my preferred ending after doing most missions, plus a few hours of multiplayer, but not anymore. Consider this a rare instance of me feeling like the Legendary Edition made something worse than the original. To me, this conflict-based structure is a much more organic approach to storytelling than having each companion get a set 2 missions. It emphasizes the point of this game as well, to conclude the great galaxy-defining and series-spanning issues, rather than to hang out with the besties. Companions do not have loyalty missions at all in this game, at least not in the way they have in the past. Companions do generally have game events that matter more to them, usually based on what happens to their homeworld, but largely they are unaffected beyond commenting on levels of destruction, with one major exception. What I like about this game's structure is that these grand conflicts feel much more important than individual squad member loyalty missions. They usually have an immense amount of greater narrative importance that hold a heavy weight for players who have heard about the problem since like hour 1 of Mass Effect 1. Hearing Rex talk about the Genophage, or seeing the Geth's progress over the series from bland villain to sympathetic friend, these are issues that feel greater than anything we have faced before, and they make up the entire game. This is not knocking the loyalty missions of the squad from the last one as a lesser format per se, as obviously we as players feel very strongly for our squad mates in all these games. But the payoff, to me, of concluding these missions that have been building up over the course of 3 games is exactly what this game was meant to feel like. That being said, this mentality of finality and grandeur has its drawbacks as well. Defeating Sovereign in the first game felt like a monumental achievement, but Mass Effect 3 takes some of that achievement away by letting you do absurd things, like defeating a Reaper single-handedly on foot. I understand that sort of tomfoolery is a result of power scaling as the games have gone on, in a sort of distinctly Dragon Ball kind of way, where the games need to up the ante as the series goes on, which then results in far-fetched moments like that. But generally, I think the resolutions to the various conflicts are handled very well. There's a very overt reason for this game's structure change. Mass Effect 3 has an overarching thesis that I will touch on many times in this video. And it is a thesis that attempts to neatly and succinctly package the messaging from every game in the series into this one. Interculturalism leads to evolution. All conflicts, creator versus creation, organic versus synthetic, they are all illusions. Only when all individuals are equal and respected can we as people evolve. All of the companions, all of the conflicts, all of the missions in this game exist to further prove this thesis to some degree. Put a pin in that. We will explore it heavily when we talk more about the plot and the endings. As the series has gone on, it has streamlined its RPG elements more and more with each title, and this one is no exception. To me, this game strikes the best combat balance thus far, keeping the ammo system from 2 and the customizable armor for Shepard while leaving the squad in their iconic outfit sets. The gunplay is fast-paced and engaging, and I like the idea of light weapon modification and the weapon variety in general. I miss the gimmicky heavy weapons from the last game a bit, but they are replaced with controlled sections of turret gunfire, riding around in an Atlas, or the occasional temporary heavy weapon on some missions. No vehicle combat period, which is epic. Generally, as always, the gameplay is not something I care much about, but it is at least really fun here. Decryption minigames are gone in this game. Hallelujah. They were always the sort of gimmick that I felt detracted from my experience, so I'm happy to see that the gimmicks in this game are much more logical with the war setting, with things like turret sections. Also, Shepard can finally run for more than 5 seconds without being winded. At last, the elite soldier has enough lung capacity to imply military-level endurance. But we must bring up an aspect that has become so streamlined that it's lost a bit of itself: the dialogue wheel. In general, I feel as though there are way less investigation options in this game. They are certainly still there, but I feel like we may have one or none in far more conversations in this game. This is an aspect that feels like a cut-for-time necessity that is also evident in the loss of the neutral option entirely. A vast majority of the conversations in this game have no more neutral option anymore, which is honestly a change that feels inevitable to me. Most players will never pick a neutral option because they don't want to lose out on the points associated with their chosen morality style for the playthrough. So when development time is dire and each dialogue option is expensive, it makes sense to cut the one that nobody is going to pick or doesn't further the narrative in some direction. Some might disagree with me and argue that the neutral option is necessary for making conversation more realistic, as not every response in the world is binarily moralistic, but practically speaking for me, I do not miss it as an option. Overall, this game tends to cut away even more fat from the already lean gameplay approach to Mass Effect 2 in a way that I usually find to be the most natural feeling to play in the series. I can easily see how some might find this game's level of streamlining to be one step too far, but as a person who plays the games for the story and not the RPG elements, I am satisfied with my gameplay experience. In my previous 2 retrospectives, I refer to the romances of 1 and 2, for me personally, as flops, due to my lack of options as a gay woman, or in the case of Mass Effect 1, there simply just not being enough of it. But folks, this is it. I starved myself for 2 games to reach this succulent buffet of romantic content for me personally. I want you to know that in this aspect of the game, I am totally, unabashedly biased. If you loved your Jack, Miranda, Jacob, or any other romance that isn't directly on the squad in this game, I am sorry for you have been shafted. But I, the righteous Liara-mancer, have been totally blessed in this game. From the opening mission on Mars and nearly every opportunity since, this game gives me seemingly endless romantic content. Mass Effect 3, to me, feels like one of the most rewarding romantic experiences that BioWare has ever put out. Seeing Liara grow as a character over the course of the games has been leading up to this one, as she finally comes into her own as a perfect balance of her shy, awkward nature forced into the role of one of the most important people in the galaxy. Garrus and Tali have similarly rewarding romances, with their characters' growths over the series and subsequent level of importance galactically in this game, giving their romances a similar weight to Liara's. But we must acknowledge that the evidence points to Liara as the default romance of this game, and thus the most rewarding content-wise. BioWare always plays favorites in their games, with one romance tending towards having the most content or implied payoff, and I am so blessed to prefer this one. Minute per minute, and in the fact that she cannot die, Liara is clearly the one that the devs favored a little more than the others. And so, having her as a romantic partner means that I am able to gorge on tons of juicy little references and moments throughout the game. It just feels extravagant compared to the last two. Not to say it's perfect, there are little hiccups for sure. Liara does begin the game a little reserved, with the status of the relationship up in the air, despite us canonically banging and rekindling like 6 months prior. Despite tons of romantic moments, and like halfway through the game, she still calls me her friend. Huh? That one took me a little back. That and the fact that Caden said he still had feelings for me at the same time, despite no indication from me that I was anything other than in love with my blue wife. Of course, I know that this is a gameplay moment to decide whether or not to officially commit to the romance, but come on, friends? Please. Tali, Liara, and Garrus have romances that feel like they have been building up for a long time. Because they have, and finally get to have rapturous payoff in this game. In the same way that the narrative of this game is just a series of payoffs, so too is the romance of any of these three characters. Mass Effect 3 really makes the best of the history the player may already have in these relationships, and feels like it takes every possible moment in the game to squeeze in a nod or reference to the relationship. Romance feels the most organic and rewarding that BioWare has arguably ever been able to make it feel in one of their games, because we don't have to waste time establishing anything. We can just jump into it being fun. And that's a great summation for the plot of this game as well. We open on Commander Shepard still grounded and discharged from service after the events of the Arrival DLC from 2, where Shepard kills like 300,000 innocent Batarians to delay the Reaper invasion. It's been 6 months of precious time to prepare that Shepard has been stuck. But we pretty immediately are called into an Alliance Council meeting with Anderson, where they ask Shepard if the forces they are seeing are Reapers. And thus begins one of the most hard-hitting and cinematic openings in gaming, the beginning of the Reaper invasion on Earth. This is a genius opening in not only its presentation, but also its immediate ability to set the stage for the stakes of the game. We have, to this point in the series, only seen a few Reapers, and each time we did, it was a huge deal. But in the first 5 minutes of this game, we are seeing them arrive en masse to a planet that is likely a sympathetic symbol for the player because we are from there. There is obvious, dramatic, immediate destruction, and the impact of seeing that kid blow up is the kind of cheesy but deeply effective pathos that defines the action movie presentation that makes these games so iconic. A player's heart can't help but sink at the enormity of the conflict and how suddenly it manifests. BioWare has since tried to have a similar intro to Dragon Age: The Veilguard, but that game does it less effectively because we as players don't care about Minrathous in that game nearly as much as we do about Earth because, once again, we are all from there. Shepard is reinstated and told to leave Earth to get help because it's pretty obvious that the forces of Earth alone will not be enough to stop the invasion. But first, a pit stop to meet with Pookie on Mars and get plans for the Crucible to defeat the Reapers somehow, and also pick up a sex bot body for Edie. Let's talk first about the Crucible. It is a plot device that we know almost nothing about, other than that it was seemingly developed by the Protheans, but was never completed and will require massive amounts of tech and knowledge beyond the power of any one race. Here is why we don't need to know how it works in any particular way. It is literally and figuratively the symbol of this game's thesis. For a reminder, the thesis of the game is society can only evolve through interculturalism. Interculturalism is defined as exchange between two or more groups where all parties benefit, and is distinct from multiculturalism because multiculturalism is simply the tolerance of other groups rather than mutually beneficial engagement. Let me put that more simply for those who aren't interested in sociopolitical theory. The game argues at every point that toleration of other groups can lead to survival, but learning from and helping other groups leads to the greatest outcomes for all. The plot of Mass Effect 3 revolves around gaining allies, however Shepard might deem it necessary, with the goal of completing the Crucible. Additionally, it is later revealed that the Crucible itself is not simply a Prothean design, but instead a design that has been rediscovered and improved upon for countless cycles. Meaning that, once again, learning from other groups, even unknowingly, and contributing with knowledge gained from our own group, has led to the evolution of the idea to the point of actually being usable. In other words, the Crucible is a symbol of not only the benefits of interculturalism in this cycle to build it, but also represents how life has benefited from interculturalism to evolve over the course of galactic cycles. This is profound stuff for a seemingly unknowable plot MacGuffin. Though here's also a moment I can point out a sillier BioWare critique I've noticed. It seems like their writers pass around an Excel sheet with imposing sounding vocab words that they insert into their games whenever possible. A sovereign, that sounds cool. That'll be our first major Reaper. And also, the name of the money in Dragon Age. This is not simply a galactic hub, this is the Citadel. This is not simply a portal to the Citadel, it's the conduit. This is not simply a Reaper cannon, it's the Crucible. Shepard is not simply good or evil, they are Paragon or Renegade. Do you see what I'm talking about? Look, I also use pretentious terminology when applicable. It also fits the general cheesy drama of the series, but it's something that I've noticed, especially when some of the terms repeat between this game series and Dragon Age. Back to the plot. After we get the plans for the Crucible, we head to the Citadel and ask the Council for help before being informed that, predictably, we can shove it until the Council races get their own homeworlds in order. The Turian Counselor tips us off that we can check out the situation on Palaven, the Turian homeworld, which is also facing Reaper invasion. The Turian Primarch tells us that they can't help us because of their own invasion, but they would if we can convince the Krogan to come help on Palaven. Then, of course, the Krogan say that they cannot help us unless we cure the genophage. When I refer to this game as having a conflict-based mission structure, this initial series of missions demonstrates that exactly. Shepard wants something, but the potential allies all must have their individual needs met before they are willing to commit themselves to the ultimate conflict. The genophage was created by the Turians and Solarians as a means to curb the Krogan rebellions, and works by limiting Krogan birth rate about 99%, according to Mordin in Mass Effect 2. He mentioned in that game that the solution was necessary to prevent the Krogan people from expanding too rapidly through warmongering, as they were initially uplifted by the Solarians for their battle prowess. However, in this game, Mordin's developed remorse for his actions that we potentially saw beginning to manifest during the events of 2. The remorse comes to fruition as we find him as an inside mole working to cure the genophage. The Solarians are interested in hiding their research into finding a cure, and the Solarian Dalatras even offers Shepard full support as an alternative to Krogan support if Shepard wishes to not cure the genophage. And here's the truth, if Rex is not alive, the genophage being cured is implied to be not as good of an outcome. Rex is seemingly the only guy in town willing to show his people the power of, say it with me now, interculturalism. Under his leadership, the Krogan people become open-minded to foreign help, clan unification toward a common goal, and general political progress. But if he is not alive, based on your choices in Mass Effect 1, the outcome for the Krogan people is much more dicey given that they are led instead by his warmongering brother, Reeve. This conflict is, of course, a statement that when societies are led with intercultural mindsets, they are able to progress. When Mordin is able to look beyond his traditional Solarian perspective, he is able to become the savior of an entire race of people. When Rex is able to look beyond the viewpoints of his backwards father and brother, he is able to unite his people and lead them to a new age of prosperity. When Bakara, or Eve as Morden calls her, is able to be a voice of reason and trusting in the support of people like Shepard and Morden, while at the same time respecting her own cultural history, true progress is achieved. The Quarian-Geth conflict teaches us a similar lesson. If Legion and Tali are both alive, and Tali is an admiral, along with a few other factors, Shepard is able to broker peace between the groups. If that is the outcome of the conflict, the Geth and Quarians team up to progress the Quarian adaptation to the atmosphere of their homeworld infinitely faster than if they had to do it alone. On the other hand, if one race survives the conflict, the annihilation of the other results in much slower progress and recovery for the surviving victor. On my first playthrough, Legion actually had not survived the final mission of 2, and so the Geth that appears in his place is basically Legion, but insists that it is not Legion. In the final choice, I sided with the Geth because they were the paragon, and also, in my opinion, morally right choice. But then, in a representation of her people, as Tali has always been, she jumps off a cliff in a moment that symbolizes the fall of Quarian society through herself. I actually cried when this happened and reloaded, allowing the destruction of the Geth instead, simply because I cared about Tali that much. Obviously, since then I have taken great care to ensure that I have the option to end the conflict with peace, but I think it speaks volumes about the game's presentation of the conflict and dramatic choices that I care so much as to define my own morals for the sake of a beloved character. Speaking of beloved characters, let's talk about how the squad members' personal growth throughout the series supports the thesis of the game. I want to start with our surviving human companion from Mass Effect 1 and their role in this game. But more specifically, I want to talk about Ashley because her growth is far more interesting. Sorry, Kaden, but you don't really learn much. You started not racist, so the Spectre promotion is just kind of like, okay. Ashley, however, begins as the anti-alien, xenophobic perspective. If she is kept alive, she serves as a success story because she learns over the course of the series that being racist is bad. A basic lesson, I know, but you'd be surprised how many still need to learn it. Regardless, her promotion to Spectre status in the third game becomes a symbolic metric to mark her growth. She's able to receive this immense honor because she defied her initial hesitance to learn from and trust her alien comrades. She comes from a line of military flops who fought against aliens, not with them. Her initial hesitance to trust is logical, but when we get to meet her again in Mass Effect 3, older and wiser since her time with Shepard, her change in perspective is directly correlated to her promotion and status. When once she may have rebuked the Council for their alien makeup, by 3, she is willing to die to defend them. Another dub for interculturalism, and a great example of how multiculturalism or simple toleration of others is not enough. Growth comes from learning from one another. Javik is a new addition to this cast, but he represents a name we have heard since the opening mission of Mass Effect 1, the Protheans. Upon his revival, ironically on the same planet where we had that first mission all those years ago, he is immediately different from what we as players have come to expect Protheans to be. It is generally assumed throughout the series that the Protheans were the symbol of enlightenment and galactic achievement. Their culture was vast, as were their assumed scientific accolades. As the series went on, more and more technologies that were initially assumed to be Prothean, like the Citadel and the mass relays and later the Crucible, all are revealed to actually be from far before their time. When we finally get to speak to Javik, he is harsh and callous, and he speaks about his people in a way that is, by the series standards, quite backwards. The Protheans were not actually the enlightened, progressive, unified society that came before, but instead a conquering and Roman-like empire. They forced assimilation into their empire, empowering one single galactic force. And this forced unity would be their undoing. The thesis of interculturalism appears again through Javik in how his people failed to realize it. They did not respect all cultures to learn and grow from them upon contact. Instead, they uplifted and warred with others until they became part of the whole. By losing those unique perspectives and considering their will superior, they could not grow to face the Reaper threat. Interestingly, after we learn about how not enlightened the Prothean people are through the Soldier of Vengeance Javik, we still learn that the Protheans were the gods that took other names to several races. The Hanars and Kindlers are the Protheans, as well as the Asari goddess Athame. Liara is abrasive to Javik for many reasons initially, as she had previously dedicated her life to studying people who were now revealed to be assholes, but she is especially hesitant to accept the obvious resemblance to the Protheans pointed out by Javik in the Temple of Athame. Tali is a character that we have seen grow from a plucky young woman on her pilgrimage to potentially an admiral of her people. As is the purpose of the pilgrimage, she has learned and grown through exposure to other cultures, an intercultural icon who relies on the help of Shepard to get to her high status because of choices in two. As an admiral, she does have a hesitance to accepting the idea of peace with Geth initially, but is happy to acknowledge how wrong she was after the fact due to the Geth's immense help. She too mourns the loss of Legion, despite only a few years ago viewing his entire race as an enemy to be wiped out. Legion's choice of sacrificing his individual life to strengthen the Geth as a whole is a sacrifice that we can see mirrored in the synthesis ending that Shepard can choose. In the same way that Shepard can potentially sacrifice their life to better all life in that ending, Legion can make the same choice here. It's kind of a beautiful parallel moment for the two characters, if those are the outcomes for both of them, as Legion's reverence of Shepard, seen even in how he wears a piece of their armor, can come to a final, meaningful conclusion. Legion ends up as Shepard himself, making the ultimate choice that his death will be worth the evolution of his people. Other companions also act as small instances of intercultural growth in their own ways. Jacob and Jack can both be found in new groups of people that are united by some circumstance, like Jack's biotic kids or Jacob's ex-Cerberus refugees, but get to learn from each other to form a stronger collective. Miranda is only able to survive by being brave enough to ask Shepard for help in accessing data from a group beyond her own. Grunt finds meaning in being a respected individual in his people's society despite being of a strange foreign origin. Samara finds peace in shedding away the fear and misconception that her own daughter is destined from genetics to be evil and is instead ultimately just a person. Every character that we have loved throughout the series has the potential to grow and achieve some form of peace in some way through Shepard, potentially showing them that their perceived barriers are not real. It is through learning to fear anything beyond the self and the individual that true evil forms. And such is the fate of Cerberus. Despite the Reaper threat being the catalyst for the events of the series, Cerberus acts as the main villainous organization in this game. Where once Shepard was forced to work with the pro-human terrorist group, in this game early on it is revealed that Cerberus has taken steps too far into indoctrination. Cerberus, to be fair, has always taken steps too far, with their experiments resulting in abuse of children and innocent autists. But at least in 2, there was an attempt by the Elusive Man to make Cerberus's more egregious sins seem like rogue sects who went too far. But in 3, from the jump, they are presented as extremists who are only interested in preserving humanity, even warring with Shepard, who was once their great symbol of human hope. They represent something even more heinous than the stagnation of multiculturalism, the perils of individualism. They are the opposite of interculturalism, hoarding knowledge to themselves in the name of preserving humanity, blind to the fact that they lose at every opportunity because to deny other perspectives is to deny progress. Once again, they prove that interculturalism is inevitable through their continual failures. Where once the Elusive Man's goal was to defeat the Reapers, he eventually succumbs to their influence under the illusion that he can control them. He becomes a pawn, just like Saren, because he allowed fear to control him. Kai Lang is basically the most corny addition to this series imaginable and is generally a nuisance. But he also acts as a demonstration that blind obedience makes one not only less effective, but also less interesting. He was essentially created by Cerberus, like Shepard, but is not able to defeat Shepard because he is just kind of a bastardized tool for the Elusive Man. Cerberus in general as a villain seems like one of the weaker aspects of this game because they seem so cartoonishly villainous for largely no other reason than indoctrination. But as we learn more about the Reapers and their motivation, it weakens Cerberus and the Elusive Man's case even further. At the end of Mass Effect 2, we learn that the Reapers actually do their cyclical harvest as a means of reproduction, an inherent act to life. In 3, we learn that the Reapers were created by Leviathan in their image to solve the problem of synthetic creations always eventually rebelling against organics and wiping them out. By the end of 3, it is up to Shepard, as a representation of the Reaper solution failing, to decide the outcome of the Reapers, but in order to make this final choice, the Reaper Collective finally explains itself a little more. The Reapers reproduce through harvesting the genetic material of millions of individuals from an advanced race, as we saw in the Collector base from the end of 2. But in 3, this is elaborated to be the solution to the inevitable synthetic-organic conflict problem, forced assimilation of the organics into a synthetic hybrid in the form of a Reaper so that their genetics can live on forever. In essence, the Reaper harvesting process is framed as the inevitable evolution of organic life because when contained into one Reaper as a single representation of the collective, that single Reaper preserves the life forever, while also saving it from destruction. Each Reaper is like an immortal time capsule of the race that was distilled into it, each cycle's harvest adding to the ever-growing Reaper collective. They are an extreme embodiment of what a machine might view as interculturalism. They force organics into an immortal and equal Reaper society, free from conflict and contributing to a great whole through learning from each new addition, but their solution fails to account for the fact that interculturalism can only work when all parties actually want to engage in it. Yes, the individuals do end up with mutually beneficial growth in some ways by ending up part of an evolving and equal consensus, but the way that the Reapers achieve this goal is the same error that the Protheans made. You cannot force evolution. The appeal of organic life is that we grow and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, and will hopefully, over time with pride, be able to understand that our growth had meaning through our failures. But by taking away the individual opportunity to come to the realization ourselves, the harvesting that the Reapers engage in, that they view as being inevitable and helpful to organics, like they're saving us, takes away organic freedom to meaningfully grow. It's like a parent taking away a knife from a child, knowing obviously that they could hurt themselves, but never explaining to the child how the knife is dangerous. It's just going to make the child want to play with more knives. Though by the end of 3, Shepard is left with the choice on how to deal with the Reapers, as their consensus admits that their solution is no longer the best one. So they basically don't know what to do with themselves. The reason why their solution is obviously not working is that for seemingly the first time in galactic history, Shepard has used the powers of interculturalism to unite a force large enough to finally beat the Reapers. Shepard can potentially demonstrate that synthetics and organics can, in fact, coexist, and that mutual destruction is not the inevitability that the Reapers once believed. So now, what to do with them? Remembering that the primary critique of Mass Effect 3 on release was that its endings were disrespectful to the series is a statement that I think lacks nuance. Obviously, the update that expands on the outcomes of the endings helped with the critique that they were the same thing but different colors, but the other critique being that the final choices have nothing to do with any other choice that a player makes in the entire series prior is one still worth dissecting. The argument I have against that statement is that although this is a reductive way to consider choice making, relying on galactic readiness to unlock endings does inherently make the endings based directly on prior choices. As in, your ending options and outcomes are directly tied to galactic readiness, which is a numeric representation of all the allies you have accumulated through choice. I know practically speaking, the complaint is that the endings are totally out of the blue seeming and feel jarring compared to the rest of the game's general feeling, but I honestly think that the ending options and presentations are very well set up by the game and are subversive, but not jarring to me. Let's analyze what I'm talking about here. There are 4 ending choices in Mass Effect 3, but some of the endings have different versions of outcomes depending on readiness. The first choice available, as in the one that will always be there regardless of readiness to some degree, is the destroy option. This option is what it sounds like. Literally kill the Reapers and all sentient synthetics. This ending is, as implied by the name and presentation of the choice, as in you literally shooting at a target, is the most destructive option, and yet also the most straightforward. It's implied that this ending leads to regression of society and will inevitably not solve the conflicts of the world, as new synthetics will eventually be created and start the wars all over again, if not wipe out organics entirely. Of course, the hope is that galactic society has grown enough to know to not war with synthetics, but the risk is still there. The second unlocked option is control. Shepard grips some metaphorical physical handbar and has their corporeal form destroyed in order to take over the Reaper hive mind. Shepard loses themselves physically, but retains memory of their life and can use the Reapers to help rebuild after the war. This option is less destructive and regressive than destroy, but ultimately doesn't directly solve the problems that the Reapers are created for either. The third option to unlock is synthesis, the final evolution outcome of the galaxy. Shepard sacrifices their body to synthesize with some synthetic DNA that then gets dispersed and literally changes all life in the galaxy down to a molecular level to be both synthetic and organic. This one is not very well explained practically, but like the Crucible's flimsy mechanical explanation, this option instead serves as a more symbolic one. This is the choice that is meant to represent, I believe, the intended outcome of the series. If you've been paying attention to me talking about the thesis of interculturalism leading to evolution in this one, this is the outcome that is most supported by the thesis to be the, in quotes, correct one. Let's talk about the evidence that supports that conclusion. Firstly, the outcome is literally the best in terms of galactic progress. It is overtly stated in the outcome slides that the societies that we have allied with over the course of the game are able to use the help of previously hostile synthetics, including all of the big Reaper tech, to advance their societies past the limits of prior imagination. So that's pretty big. Secondly, how the choice is presented cinematically in the moment is very specific in stating that this is something beyond the normal binary of choice. Control and destroy are presented with the standard Paragon Blue versus Renegade Red coloration, but this is actually one of two times that I think the binary presentation actually reverses the choices, with the other time being in Legion's loyalty mission outcomes in Mass Effect 2. In any other instance, a choice represented by the Elusive Man in this game would be Renegade, because the guy has become indoctrinated and is thus traditionally evil. Likewise, any choice associated with Anderson in the trilogy has always been the Paragon choice. But I think this was them trying to be subversive or something, maybe vaguely implying that indoctrination was not as evil as we might have thought now that we know the Reaper's motivation, or maybe Destroy was defaulted to Renegade because it is the most destructive and leads to the least amount of progress. I'm not actually sure what the intention was on this one, but I do know that us having something between the trained binary, something bigger and presented without a familiar face, with an unfamiliar color, is very important to the symbolism of the choice. It's like it's screaming that synthesis is bigger than good or evil. It's something that lies right in front of you because it is inevitable. A final piece of evidence supporting synthesis as the true final outcome is in a moment of symbolism that BioWare loves to play into, which is biblical imagery. When the Normandy crash lands after choosing synthesis, Joker and EDI step out into the jungle planet and stand side by side, holding one another, representing in that moment the new future of life. Their once fundamental barrier of being an organic and synthetic no longer exists, and instead they stand side by side as a figurative Adam and Eve at the dawn of a new age of life. Just as Eve was born of the rib of Adam, so too were the synthetics represented by EDI finally able to stand side by side with their once creator, in this case represented ironically by Jeff, as true final equals. Only now, as it is implied, can life truly begin. Now, with all that being said, I think this message is very good and well supported and cool, but I always pick Destroy. I'm serious. I picked Destroy because with enough galactic readiness, Destroy is the only outcome where Shepard lives. And I need her to live on and have little blue babies. Sorry guys, I can talk about grandiose metatextual analysis and the epic presentation of deeply thought out themes, but I am only human, and I cannot let Pookie be sad about me being dead. In all seriousness, I do think synthesis is the most appropriate ending for the series, and the galaxy. And all of the conflicts and stories that we have experienced for the entire series have led up to that outcome perfectly. I love the presentation of it, I love the outcomes of it, and I think it is a great message for the game to have. And shout out to the secret fourth ending where you just pop one into the kid. That's crazy, but I have heard a ton of stories that people did that on accident to be funny, and I think that's hilarious. There are 3 DLC in this game, and they range from fine to the greatest of all time. Let's start with the fine one, Omega. Cerberus has taken over Omega, so we have to return to it and take it back for Arya T'Loak. This one is just kind of a standard shooting gallery with a classic action movie villain, and our first look at a female Turian. To me, it's nothing particularly groundbreaking, but I can see how you would like this if you particularly like Omega or Arya. Leviathan is a DLC that feels like a bit of a crime because it reveals what feels like pretty essential origin information about the Reapers. You help some scientists locate the creator of the Reapers, the Leviathan, and learn about why they came to be and how they got their indoctrination powers. It's kind of drawn out to me, but the presentation of going into the depths of the ocean to see that awesome, organic Reaper-looking Leviathan is an amazing moment. Well, now with those 2 out of the way, let's talk about the greatest DLC I have ever played in any game ever, by a lot. And I'm not joking, Citadel. Let me start off by saying that I totally get why this was DLC and not included. It's a massive tonal shift for the series, so for that reason, some people might have found it totally jarring or even cringe. So if they are, insane or sociopaths, they might have wanted to avoid it. But for those who appreciate the goofier aspects of the series, holy shit, guys, this is one of the most concentrated love bombs this series has ever seen. It's kind of like enabling Wild Wasteland in New Vegas, but times 1,000. Shepard and the squad take some shore leave to get themselves and the Normandy some necessary TLC. Shepard takes over Anderson's swanky apartment before some shenanigans immediately begin. This is a constant joke fest with the besties, filled to the brim with references and silliness and just pure fun. Even the conflict with the evil Shepard, a classic and highly corny action movie trope, is so funny. Of course, what defines Shepard as we know them is friendship. Aww. The main appeal is that you literally hang out with and throw a party for your friend. All of the companions that are still kicking get some time in the spotlight here, and of course, there are ample nods to your romance as well. The whole DLC just feels like a warm hug from BioWare to their own games and to the community. When I said earlier that I disagreed somewhat with the new philosophy that Veilguard takes about not having DLC, this is what I'm talking about. I feel like having a DLC like this one, just a bunch of time to hang out with the friends you've made along the way, would do that game wonders. Though, to be fair, I think that what makes this DLC so successful is that it feels so earned. We've been fighting in the most dire and devastating war in human history, facing constant losses and sadness the entire time. And yet, in this brief time, we can all take a moment to just be happy with one another before the end of it all. That's the kind of beauty that defines humanity and what we're fighting for in this whole game. And Tully getting shit-faced regardless of the tone of the party is just so funny. It's all just good times. Mass Effect 3 is my favorite in the series, despite its need to cook in the oven a little longer based on initial fan backlash, because it is a constant stream of caring. We care about the stakes from the get-go. We immediately jump into solving the issues in any way that we can with the people we already care about. We care about the conflicts and their outcomes. We care about the people that we are losing along the way. Even the DLC is just time spent with those we care about one last time. This game epitomizes the series to me. It is the most cinematic, the most intense, the most distilled rush of important moment after important moment that has been built up for the entire trilogy. This is the kind of game that I cry after playing because I don't want it to end. The thesis of this game is the thesis of the series, and regardless of whether or not Shepard can make every outcome the best, the fact still remains that this game wants players to take away its lesson. Divisions are made up and born of fear. Individualism is regressive. The only way we as a global real world or imaginary galactic society can evolve and better the lives of the collective is to respect and learn from one another. That is so important. It was important a decade ago when this came out, and it's still more important than ever. I must admit, I have fear in my heart hearing that the series is getting another entry. To me, this is a trilogy that completes itself in this game perfectly. Andromeda was a game I played on release, also almost a decade ago, and found myself not really enjoying. I might give it another go to make a retrospective, but don't be surprised if I don't because I can't stomach it. But seeing in the few small snippets that have been released so far for 5 that it will be a more direct sequel to this game given the presence of Liara, whether that be immediate or in a few centuries, I am nervous. Given how little interest BioWare has shown in considering player choice in its most recent titles, I cannot, as a game designer myself, imagine how they hope to continue the story of this galaxy while respecting the state that the players have left it in. But I can't speculate too much given that we know basically nothing about it yet, so I suppose my statement is that I hope that they consider what made this original trilogy so great. Payoff of investment. Investment into the characters, the universe, the conflicts, and into Shepard. I pray that they do not use faces like Liara's to lure us into a version of the galaxy that is the same regardless of our choices in this one, like how they did in Veilguard, but only time will tell. Thank you so much for watching. This one took a lot of work, but it's worth it for a game that had such an impact on me as a person. I work in games now largely because this game series convinced me that games could be art, that games are a medium that can send real messages and cause real emotions. Feel free to stick around on the channel. I've been liking this essay format and have interest in going back to another favorite trilogy of mine in anticipation of its next entry.